Hey future doctors, today we are going to discuss about pharmacology in a simplified manner. So today we are going to cover all the important topics for your uni. So it comprises important topics of GIT, CVS as well as renal. In CVS we are going to cover about antihypertensive drugs, anti-anginal drugs as well as congestive cardiac failure. Then in GIT we are going to cover about emetics, antiemetics, then drugs for peptic ulcer, laxatives as well as antidiarrheal drugs. And in renal we are going to cover all the types of diuretics. So let's get started with the antihypertensive drugs. So hypertension, this is a common cardiovascular disease which affects the worldwide population. So to treat the hypertension, we actually give antihypertensive drugs. So antihypertensive drugs, these are divided into 5 types: diuretics, renin-angiotensin system inhibitors, sympathetic inhibitors, then calcium channel blockers and vasodilators. So diuretics, this is divided into 3 things: thiazide, high ceiling and potassium sparing. Thiazide, it includes hydrochlorothiazide or chlorthalidone. Then high ceiling, it includes furosemide. And in potassium sparing, we actually use spironolactone or amiloride. The next is RAS inhibitors, that is renin-angiotensin system inhibitors. It also includes 3 things: AC inhibitors, angiotensin receptor blockers, and direct renin inhibitors. In AC inhibitors, we give captopril, enalapril, lisinopril, perindopril or ramipril. And in ARBs, we actually administer losartan, candesartan, valsartan, telmisartan. And last is direct renin inhibitors. Here we prefer only one drug, that is aliskiren. The next is sympathetic inhibitors. It has 4 groups, that is beta adrenergic blockers, alpha plus beta adrenergic blockers, then alpha adrenergic blockers, and last is central sympatholytics. So beta blockers, it has mnemonic, that is MAP, so propranolol, metoprolol and atenolol. Then alpha plus beta blockers, it includes labetalol or carvedilol. Then alpha blocker, it includes prazosin, terazosin, doxazocin. And the last but not the least is central sympatholytic. It includes clonidine or methyl-dopa. The next group is calcium channel blockers. It also includes 3 things, that is phenylethylamine, benzodiazepine, dihydropyridines. In this, we actually administer verapamil. Benzodiazepines, it includes diltiazem. And last is dihydropyridines, it includes nifedipine, felodipine or amlodipine. Then the last is vasodilators. It also includes 2 things: arterial dilator or arterial plus venodilators. So arterial dilator, it has 2 things: minoxidil and diazoxide. And arterial plus venodilator, we prefer sodium nitrochloride. So let's see all the things in detail. So before going on this classification, we are first going to see about basics. Angiotensin, it is converted into angiotensin 1 with the help of renin. Then angiotensin 1, it is converted into angiotensin 2 with the help of angiotensin converting enzyme. And then angiotensin 2, it acts on the 4 things. First is blood vessel, then aldosterone release, then cardiac hypertrophy and remodeling, and it will also increase the sympathetic activity. So first is blood vessel. It will constrict the blood vessel and it will increase the peripheral resistance. And so as it will increase the BP. Then next is aldosterone release. It will retain the sodium and water and it will also increase the BP. And third is cardiac hypertrophy and remodeling, and fourth is increasing the sympathetic activity. So this was all about how the BP will increase. So these are basically 2 things which are inhibited in this process. So now we are going to see this in detail. First is angiotensin converting enzyme inhibitors. Inhibit the generation of angiotensin 2, which will result in the dilation of arterioles. As we know that the angiotensin does vasoconstriction, so it will basically dilate the arterioles. As well as if the arterioles are dilated, then there will be decrease in the PVR, and so as the BP will get decreased. This decrease in the aldosterone production, it will lead to decrease in the sodium and water retention, hence BP will get decreased. Then third is decrease in sympathetic system activity. It will inhibit the degradation of blood vessel, it means vasodilation will occur, and it will stimulate the synthesis of prostaglandins. Now we are going to see about pharmacokinetics. ACE inhibitors are given orally, but in a hypertensive emergency, enalapril can be given intravenously. And food reduces the absorption of captopril, so it should be given 1 hour before the meals. As well as ACE inhibitors poorly cross the blood-brain barrier and they are metabolized in the liver and excreted in urine. So this was all about pharmacokinetic. Now we are going to see about adverse effect. So there is one mnemonic, that is captopril. This stands for cough. Presence of the cough is the indication to stop the drug, and it subsides the following discontinuation of the drug. Then next is angioedema. There will be swelling in the nose, lips, mouth, throat, larynx and glottis. There can be airway obstruction also, that the patient's airway should be protected. The next is proteinuria. So it can occur rarely, but then teratogenic effect, that it will lead to growth retardation, fetal hypotension and neonatal death. Hence it is contraindicated in pregnancy. The next is hypotension. It can be marked in the patients who have low volume or congestive heart failure. The next is neutropenia. It is also a rare case. Next is rashes. Then next is itching. If there is itching, then the drug should be discontinued, as well as loss of taste sensation. So this we can remember by the help of captopril. So this was all about adverse effect and its contradiction. Now we are going to see about therapeutic uses of ACE inhibitors. So first is hypertension. So ACE inhibitors are used in all grades of hypertension. They will decrease the cardiovascular and cerebrovascular morbidity and mortality. The next is acute MI, that is myocardial infarction. So ACE inhibitors should be started within 24 hours in the patient with MI. Then congestive heart failure. So in this also ACE inhibitors should be prescribed. Then next is diabetic neuropathy. 2 things are recommended, that the ACE inhibitors and angiotensin 2 receptor blockers, that is ARBs. These are preferred drug in the diabetic neuropathy in hypertensive as well as normotensive patients. So this was all about ACE inhibitors. After ACE inhibitor, there will be direct renin inhibitor, that is known as aliskiren. So angiotensin, it gets converted into angiotensin 1 with the help of renin, and aliskiren, it will inhibit the renin synthesis. And this inhibition, it will decrease the level of angiotensin 1 and angiotensin 2. It is useful in hypertension in combination with the diuretics, ACE inhibitors or ARBs. Aliskiren is administered orally, and the adverse effects of this are diarrhea, abdominal pain, headache and angioedema. Now basically what do you mean by angioedema? It is the swelling of lips, nose. Now next topic is diuretics. So mechanism of action of thiazide. So thiazide, it will inhibit the NaCl's import in the early part of DCT. Now as it is inhibited, it will promote the sodium and water excretion. If the excretion of sodium and water get increased, then there will be decrease in the blood volume. And if the blood volume is decreased, then the CO, or that is the cardiac output, it will also get decreased. Hence, BP will also get decreased. Then if we use on the chronic therapy, then the sodium concentration in the vascular smooth muscle, it will get decreased. And due to this, peripheral vascular resistance will get decreased, which will lead to decrease in BP. So these are used in uncomplicated mild to moderate hypertensions, and they have long duration of action. As well as they should be administered in the low dose, that is 12.5 mg of chlorthalidone or hydrochlorothiazide. And if the antihypertensive response is not adequate, then the dose can be increased up to 25 mg per day. So this was about mechanism and pharmacokinetics. Now we are going to see about advantage of thiazides. So they have longer duration of action, they are cheap, and they are well tolerated by the elderly patients. The adverse effects are as hypokalemia, hyperglycemia, hyperuricemia, hyperlipidemia, hypercalcemia, impotence and decreased libido. Basically there will be the increase in glucose, uric acid as well as lipid. Now next topic is calcium channel blockers. Basically here there are 5 voltage calcium channels, that are L, N, T, P, R, and these calcium channel blockers, it will block the voltage gated L type calcium channels by binding to the alpha 1 subunit, and it will prevent the entry of calcium into cell, which will lead to no excitation contraction coupling in the heart as well as vascular smooth muscles. So this was about mechanism of action of CCBs. Now we are going to see about therapeutic indications. So first is variant angina. It is due to coronary spasm, amlodipine, nifedipine and diltiazem. This can be used prophylactically in the case of variant angina. Now next is supraventricular arrhythmias. So verapamil is useful for this. Next is hypertension. In this, DHPs, diltiazem and verapamil, these are used in hypertension. They will control the BP by the vasodilatory effect, as well as it can be used in hypertension patients with asthma, hyperlipidemia and renal dysfunction. Then fourth is hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. So verapamil is the preferred CCB as it improves the diastolic function. Then fifth is migraine. So verapamil, it is used as prophylaxis of the migraine. And another CCB is also used, that is known as flunarizine. It is more effective than the verapamil and it reduces the frequency of migraine attacks. Now we are going to see about adverse effects. So nifedipine, it has adverse effect of hypotension, palpitation, reflex tachycardia, edema, flushing, fatigue, dizziness and sedation. Next is verapamil. So in this there will be constipation, sinus bradycardia, edema, AV block and headache, which occur rarely. Then next is diltiazem. In this case there will be headache, hypotension, bradycardia, edema and AV block rarely. So edema will be present in all the drugs, as well as headache will also be there. Now last is sympatholytics. So basically sympatholytics are the drug which inhibit the sympathetic nervous system by blocking the adrenergic receptors. So adrenergic blockers are used in all cases of hypertension, and selective beta blockers as well as non-selective beta blockers are also used. In selective beta blocker, examples are atenolol, metoprolol, betaxolol, and non-selective beta blockers, it includes propranolol. Now let's see about mechanism. So basically beta blocker, it will block the CNS as well as heart and kidney. In heart, it will block the beta 1 receptor, it will decrease the heart rate, force of contraction as well as cardiac output, which will lead to decrease in BP. As well as in kidney, it will also block the beta 1 receptors and it will release the renin, which will lead to decrease in BP. So basically beta blocker, it will precipitate the congestive heart failure as well as bronchospasm in the individuals. As well as they can cause the sexual dysfunction in the males and nightmare. They must be used in the caution in diabetes patient receiving hypoglycemia. So this was all about sympatholytics. Now we are going to see about centrally acting symptolytic. So first is clonidine. It is centrally acting antihypertensive drug. The route of drug administration is oral and it is highly lipid soluble and rapidly crosses the blood-brain barrier. As well as it has the short duration of action and it requires twice a day administration. As well as transdermal patches are also present to control the BP for a week. So now we are going to see about adverse effects. Dryness of mouth as well as eyes, then sedation, depression, bradycardia, impotence, dizziness, as well as parotid gland swelling and pain. So these are some adverse effects of clonidine. As well as there can be postural hypotension. So firstly, clonidine, it will stimulate the alpha 2A receptors in the vasomotor central. Now this stimulation, it will decrease the sympathetic outflow from VMC. That is, it will decrease the sympathetic outflow from the vasomotor center, and then it will decrease the heart rate, cardiac output as well as BP, as well as it will decrease the peripheral vascular resistance and hence decrease the BP. This was all about clonidine. Now we are going to see about alpha methyl dopa. So this is also a centrally acting sympatholytic agent. Now we are going to see about mechanism of action. So first, alpha methyl dopa, it will get converted into alpha methyl dopamine, where it get metabolized into alpha methyl noradrenaline, which will stimulate the alpha 2 VMPs and decrease the central sympathetic outflow, which will lead to decreased heart rate and decreased peripheral vascular resistance. Hence, BP will get decreased. Now there are some adverse effects. First is nasal stiffness, headache, sedation, mental depression, dryness of mouth, bradycardia, impotence, hepatitis and rarely hemolytic anemia. So this was all about methyl dopa. Now we are going to see about alpha adrenergic blockers. So alpha blockers, they are of two types, non-selective and selective. Now non-selective, it will include alpha 1 and alpha 2, but in selective it will include alpha 1 blockers. Now non-selective blocker includes phenoxybenzamine and pentolamine, and selective blocker it will include prazosin and terazosin. Now non-selective blocker, it will block the alpha 1 and alpha 2 receptors in the blood vessel, and selective blocker, it will block the selectively alpha 1 vascular receptor by the competitive mechanism. Non-selective blockers has the vasodilation effect, as well as it will decrease the BP, as well as it will increase the noradrenaline release. Now we are going to see about vasodilators. So minoxidil and dioxide, this two drug, it will activate the potassium channels, which will lead to efflux of potassium ion, which will cause hyperpolarization of the vascular smooth muscle, and it will lead to vasodilation of blood vessels, and it will decrease the BP. Now we are going to see about minoxidil in detail. So this is a powerful arterial dilator. It is taken orally and it causes the reflex tachycardia, sodium water retention. Hence it is used with the beta blockers and diuretics. The next is diazoxide. So it is used in the treatment of hypertensive emergencies. It is also administered IV and has a longer duration of action, that is 6 to 24 hours. And the adverse effects are reflex tachycardia, hyperglycemia, and sodium and water retention. Now we are going to see about sodium nitroprusside. This is a powerful arterial and venodilator, a balanced arteriovenous dilator. So the mechanism of action is, if we have given the sodium nitroprusside IV, so basically two things will be there. There will be nitric oxide and cyanide. So nitric oxide, it will do arterial and venodilation, and cyanide, it will get converted into thiocyanide in the liver, and it is excreted slowly through the urine. Now as we saw that the sodium nitroprusside, it will generate nitric oxide, it will relaxes the smooth muscle and cause vasodilation. Now on the heart there will be two things, venodilator and arterial dilator. Now in venodilator there will be pooling of blood in the veins, which will lead to decreased venous return, which will lead to decreased preload, decreased cardiac output, and decreased BP. And opposite to this, in the arterial dilator there will be decrease in the afterload, and which will lead to decrease in BP. So this was all about antihypertensive drugs. Anti-anginal drugs. So angina pectoris, this is the most common symptom of ischemic heart disease. Angina occurs due to imbalance in the oxygen supply and the oxygen demand myocardium. So basically if the oxygen supply is less and oxygen demand is more, so in this case angina occur. Now there are some causes due to which oxygen supply is less and oxygen demand is more. So first we will see about oxygen supply. So coronary atherosclerosis, coronary vasospasm, coronary thrombosis. So these three are the reasons due to which oxygen supply is less. And increased heart rate, ventricular hypertrophy, increased ventricular contractility, and increased ventricular wall tension. So these are four things due to which O2 demand increases. Now what's the treatment for this? So if the O2 is increased, then we can restore the coronary blood flow by percutaneous intervention, that is PCI, including stenting, or coronary artery bypass graft, that is CABG. Then second is we can also relieve the vasospasm by drugs, that is by giving the nitrates. Then third is by breaking the thumb by using the thrombolytic agent such as streptokinase or urokinase. And fourth is which prevent the thrombus formation by using the antiplatelet drug. So by these four things we can restore the coronary blood flow and we can increase the oxygen supply. The next is the oxygen supply is less. So in this case, by reducing the workload on the heart, we can reduce the oxygen supply. It can occur by three things: by decreasing the preload by giving nitrates, and afterload by giving CCBs, that is calcium channel blockers, calcium channel openers, and third is decrease in HR, that is heart rate and contractibility, by giving the beta adrenergic blockers. Now what do you mean by preload? So volume of blood which enters the ventricle at the end of diastole, it is known as preload. And what is afterload? That is the resistance which is left in the ventricle which must overcome to circulate the blood. So this is known as afterload. Three reasons due to which oxygen supply can be decreased. Now we are going to see about anti-anginal drugs. So basically it is divided into 5 types, that is nitrate, beta blockers, calcium channel blockers, potassium channel openers, and other anti-anginal drugs. So in nitrate it can be divided into two things, that is short acting and long acting. In short acting there can be glyceryl trinitrate, isosorbide dinitrate, and in long acting it can be isosorbide dinitrate or sorbide mononitrate. So these are four things which came under nitrates. Under beta blocker there will be same PAM, that is propanol, atenolol, and metoprolol. Then calcium channel blockers there will be amlodipine and nitrodipine. And in potassium channel opener there will be nicorandil. And last is other anti-anginal drugs. In this there can be dipyridamole or ranolazine. Classification of anti-anginal drug. Now we are going to see about nitrates. So these are products which releases the nitric oxide. So basically product means it is a silent compound which is get converted into active agent after administration. So this nitrate, it will release the nitric oxide, and these nitrates are mainly venodilators. It means they will dilate the vessels, also cause arterial dilatation, thus preload and afterload. Now what's the mechanism of action? So basically nitrates will release the nitric oxide in the smooth muscle cell, then it will stimulate guanylyl cyclase, then it will increase the CGMP, is the increased level of cyclic guanosine monophosphate. Then there will be dephosphorylation of myosin light chain kinase. Then there will be decrease in calcium concentration in cytosol, and this will lead to relaxation of vascular smooth muscle fibers. Now after this there will be vasodilation, arterial filtration and dilation of large coronary vessels and collateral vessels. So in vasodilation, that is the predominant effect, so there will be peripheral pooling of blood. Due to pooling of blood there will be decreased venous return to the heart, as well as if the venous return is decreased then preload also will get decreased, and if preload is decreased then the left and right end systolic ventricular volume will also get decreased. It means the ventricular volumes in both the ventricle it will get decreased, and it will lead to decreased cardiac work, which will lead to decreased oxygen demand. Decreased oxygen demand, there will be relief of anginal pain. So this is due to vasodilation of the vessels. Now there is arterial filtration. So in this PVR, that is peripheral vascular resistance, will get decreased. If this is decreased, then the afterload will get decreased, and after that there will be less cardiac work, and due to less cardiac work there will be low oxygen demand, and due to low oxygen demand the relief of anginal pain will be there. So basically if the large coronary vessels and collateral vessels dilate, then there will be redistribution of coronary blood flow, which will lead to decreased blood flow to the ischemic area, and which will ultimately lead to increased oxygen delivery to the ischemic areas, and which will lead to relief in the anginal pain. So these are three things which are responsible for the anginal pain relief. Now we are going to see about therapeutic uses of nitrates. So first and foremost important thing is angina. The acute attack of the angina, nitroglycerin is used, and it is a drug of choice in the case of angina. Nitroglycerin, it is given sublingually and the dose is 0.5 mg, and it relieves the pain in 2 to 3 minutes. Now patient is advised to spit as tablet as soon as the pain is relieved to avoid the side effects. So the side effects are hypotension and headache. So basically there is a limit, you can't take more than 3 tablets in a 15 minute. So this was all about nitroglycerin. Now we are going to see about for the prophylaxis of angina. So longer acting nitrate preparation are used for this, such as isosorbate mononitrate orally or isosorbate dinitrate, it can be also given orally. Then nitroglycerin and sustained release preparations such as ointment, disc, patches, these are also used for the prophylaxis of angina. Transdermal nitroglycerin is also there, which produces the prolonged effect up to 24 hours. Now we are going to see about variant angina. So basically angina has 3 types, that is stable, unstable and variant. So variant angina, it is due to coronary vasospasm, and the episodes of coronary vasospasm, these are treated with nitrates. For prophylaxis we use nitrates and CCBs, that is calcium channel blockers, such as amlodipine, nifedipine or diltiazem. So these are most effective drugs which are used for variant angina. Now we are going to see about unstable angina. So antiplatelet agents are given for this, such as low dose aspirin, clopidogrel, these are used as antiplatelet agents. The next is anticoagulant. So for this low molecular weight heparin or unfractioned heparin is used. The next is nitrates. So for this nitroglycerin, that is taken sublingually, this is usually effective, and intravenous nitroglycerin is also administered if the pain persists or recurs. Now for these beta blockers, so such as atenolol, metoprolol, these are routinely administered in the unstable angina unless contraindicated. And fifth is CCBs, that is calcium channel blockers. So amlodipine, nifedipine, diltiazem, this can be used if the symptoms persist in the patient on the nitrates and beta blockers, or if the beta blockers are contraindicated. So in this case CCBs are used. Then next is hypertensive emergency. So in this case intravenous infusion of nitroglycerin is given due to its rapid onset. And fifth is cyanide poisoning. So basically in this, cyanide will inhibit the cytochrome oxidase and it will prevent oxygen utilization by the cell. So all tissue it will suffer from anoxia, that is the loss of oxygen, absence of oxygen. Then amyl nitrate, sodium nitrate, these are used in treatment of cyanide poisoning, and nitrates rapidly convert hemoglobin to methemoglobin. As well as IV sodium thiosulfate can be also given, which convert the cyanomethemoglobin to sodium thiocyanate, which is rapidly excreted in the urine. So basically hemoglobin is converted into methemoglobin, then it is converted to cyanomethemoglobin, then after that it is converted into sodium thiocyanate, which is rapidly excreted in the urine. Now next is potassium channel openers. These are also known as potassium channel activators. So here the drug of choice is nicorandil. It is administered orally. It will cause the arterial and venodilation, as well as it will improve the coronary blood flow. So basically nicorandil, it will open the ATP dependent potassium channel, then there will be potassium efflux, and due to this there will be hyperpolarization. Now due to hyperpolarization there will be 2 things, that is venodilation and arterial dilation, and due to arterial dilation there will be decreased afterload, and due to venodilation there will be decreased preload. As well as nicorandil, it will release the nitric oxide, or it will increase the cyclic GMP, and due to the increase in this it will relax the vascular smooth muscles, and due to relaxation of this there will be arterial dilatation, which will lead to decreased afterload. So this was all about angina and the anti-anginal drugs. Now the next topic is drugs used in congestive cardiac failure. Now as we know that the normal function of the heart is to pump an adequate amount of blood to the various tissues. But in CCF there is a failure of this. There will be inadequate or insufficient contraction of heart, which will lead to reduced cardiac output. Now to compensate the cardiac output, there are various mechanisms what the body does. So it increases the sympathetic activity, increase the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone activity, as well as myocardial hypertrophy and remodeling can also. Now let's see all these things in detail. Now, if the person is suffering from CCF, it means the cardiac output is decreased. And due to decreased cardiac output, it will reduce renal blood flow. And as the renal blood flow is reduced, it means there will be sodium and water retention, which will lead to edema. Now, to treat this mechanism, we actually give various drugs. So, it depends on backward failure or forward failure. So, in backward failure, there will be distended veins with increased preload, and whereas on the other side, in forward failure, there will be narrowed arterioles with increased afterload. In the case of increased preload, we prefer nitrates, ACE inhibitors, or ARBs. And on the other side, in the forward failure, it means in an increased afterload, we prefer ACE inhibitors, ARB, as well as the other vasodilators. Additional to this, we also give digitalis and dobutamine to increase the cardiac output. As we also give diuretics, it means there will be less sodium or water retention. Now, what are the drugs which are given for the CCF? So, they are divided into 6 types, that is inotropic drugs, then renin-angiotensin inhibitor, diuretics, then vasodilators, aldosterone antagonist, and last is beta-adrenergic blockers. So, in inotropic drugs, we prefer 3 things: cardiac glycosides, sympathomimetics, and PDE3. PDE3 means phosphodiesterase 3. In cardiac glycosides, we prefer digoxin or Auben. Then in sympathomimetics, we prefer dobutamine or dopamine. Then PDE3 inhibitors, it includes milrinone. Next is renin-angiotensin inhibitor. It includes 2 things: ACE inhibitors and angiotensin 81 receptor blockers. It means ARBs. So in ACE inhibitors, there are 2 things: enalapril or ramipril. And ARBs, it includes losartan, candesartan, telmisartan. Then third is diuretics. It is divided into 2 things: high saline and thiazide-like. In high saline, we prefer furosemide, butenamide. In addition to high saline, we prefer thiazide-like, that is metalazone. The next is aldosterone antagonist. It includes spironolactone. Then beta-adrenergic blockers, it include metoprolol or bisoprolol. And last is vasodilators. It include venodilator, arteriodilator, as well as arterial plus venodilators. So in venodilators, we prefer glyceryl trinitrate or isosorbide trinitrate. In arterial dilator, we prefer hydralazine. And arterial plus venodilator, it is sodium nitroprusside. So now let's see these things in detail. So first is diuretics. So majority of patients with CHF, they are started on diuretics. Now what is the mechanism of diuretics? So diuretic, they promote the salt and water excretion, and due to the excretion, it will lead to decreased circulating volume. And as the volume is decreased, it means preload is also decreased. And due to decreased preload, it means the CCF, it get treated. It means it will improve the cardiac function, as well as it will decrease the edema and relieve the symptoms of congestion. So this was all about diuretics. Now we are going to see about cardiac glycosides. So there are various cardiac glycosides. There are digitoxin, digoxin, or strophanthin G. Now what's the mechanism of action of this? So sodium ATPase pump, it is a membrane bound enzyme which is called digitalis receptor, as well as it is also known as the sodium potassium pump. Now this digitalis, it will bind and inhibit this pump, which will lead to increased sodium concentration, and due to increased sodium, it means increased calcium also. And due to increased sodium, it will lead to decreased calcium extrusion via sodium calcium exchanger. And as the extrusion of the calcium is decreased, in which there is also increase in calcium. Now as there is an increase in intracellular calcium, it means there will be increased calcium uptake and storage in the sarcoplasmic reticulum. To this, there will be more calcium released during the each action potential from SR, that is sarcoplasmic reticulum. So as the more calcium is released, it means there will be excitation contraction coupling, which increases the myocardial contractibility, hence cardiac output get increased. So it's all about mechanism of action. Now we are going to see about its actions. So there are 2 types of actions, cardiac and extracardiac. So cardiac, it comprises myocardial contractibility, heart rate, then electrophysiological actions and ECG. So first is myocardial contractibility. So digitalis, it increases the force of contraction of myocardium, and this is more prominent in the failing hearts. The second is heart rate. So in the patients with CCF, the digitalis, it reduces the heart rate by the direct and indirect action. If the digitalis is given in a small doses, then it decreases the heart rate by stimulation of vagus nerve. But in a toxic doses, it can increase the sympathetic activity, thus increase the heart rate. The next is electrophysiological actions. So if it is given at the therapeutic concentration, then digitoxin, it decreases the automaticity as well as increases the resting membrane potential. But if this is given in a higher concentration, then digoxin, it increases the automaticity in the cardiac tissue by direct acting as well as by increasing the sympathetic activity. So this can result in atrial as well as ventricular arrhythmias. The next is ECG. So digitalis, it produces 3 things. First is prolongation of PR interval, then inversion of T wave, and last is depression of S wave. So these are some cardiac things. Now extracardiac. So in GIT, the digitalis can produce the anorexia, nausea, vomiting as well as diarrhea. Then in kidney, it can cause diuresis, it means increased urine output. Then in CNS, it can cause sympathetic stimulation, confusion, blurring of region and disorientation. Now what are effects of digitalis? So digitalis, it actually has the positive inotropic effect. So it increases the cardiac output. Now as the cardiac output gets increased, it means the circulation also improves. And due to improved circulation, it will lead to increased in renal blood flow, which ultimately lead to increased sodium and water excretion, and finally edema and dyspnea will get relieved. So these were some cardiac and extracardiac actions of the digitalis. Now we are going to see about adverse effects. So this digoxin, it has narrow margin of safety. So monitoring of serum digoxin, electrolyte levels and ECG, this is important during the digitalis therapy. So this is also divided into 2 things, cardiac and extracardiac. So first we are going to see about cardiac. So digitalis, it can cause any type of arrhythmias. The most common are ventricular premature beats or ventricular tachycardia. Addition to this, it can also cause AV block, atrial tachycardia, atrial fibrillation, atrial flutter as well as severe bradycardia. The next is extracardiac. So first is in GIT. It can cause anorexia, nausea and vomiting. Then in CNS, it can cause headache, confusion, restlessness, disorientation, weakness, visual disturbance, altered mood as well as hallucinations. Additional to this, there can be skin rashes or gynecomastia also. So this was all about congestive cardiac failure. To say about diuretics. So diuretics are the drug which will promote the excretion of sodium and water in urine. So basically diuretic is divided into high saline, medium efficacy and weak diuretics. So here we are going to see about weak diuretic. First is carbonic anhydrase inhibitor. It will act on PCT. An example is acetazolamide. Now mechanism of action of this is the sodium will enter the cell from the lumen in exchange for the hydrogen from the cell. So here hydrogen ion which is secreted in the lumen, it will combine with bicarbonate to form carbonic acid in the presence of carbonic anhydrase. Now it will get dissociate into H2O and CO2, and then CO2 produced, it will enter the PCT through simple diffusion, and then CO2 plus H2O, it will give H2CO3. Now due to dissociation of carbonic acid, the hydrogen ion is available for the transport by sodium hydrogen exchanger. So here the sodium bicarbonate reabsorption and hydrogen ion excretion, it is dependent on the carbonic anhydrase activity. So basically if we inhibit this, then there will be no exchange, and this can be inhibited by the help of diuretics. Now we are going to see about uses. So first use is glaucoma. So here carbonic anhydrase inhibitors, this will decrease the intraocular pressure by the decreasing formation of aqueous humor. Now acetazolamide, which can be given orally or through IV, this is used in acute congestive glaucoma. Now second is acidic drug poisoning to the alkaline urine, and third is the acute mountain motion sickness. So here acetazolamide is used for as a sympathomimetic relief or a prophylaxis of a motion mountain sickness. Now we are going to see about adverse effects. So there are 6 adverse effects. First is hypersensitivity reaction, then drowsiness, hypokalemia, then metabolic acidosis, headache and renal stones. So this is all about carbonic anhydrase inhibitor, osmotic diuretics. This acts on loop of Fenley and PCT, and it includes mannitol, glycerol or isosorbate. Now we are going to see about mechanism of action. So first they will draw water from the tissues. Now due to this there will be increased ECF volume, which will result in increased excretion of H2O and electrolytes. Now if we administered mannitol through IV, then there will be increased plasma osmolarity. And due to this increase, there will be shift of fluid from the intracellular to extracellular, which will lead to increased extracellular fluid. And if this is increased, then body needs to excrete, so it will increase the GFR. Mannitol, it will get filtered at glomerulus. Now due to this filtration, it will increase the tubular osmolarity also. And due to this, there will be decreased absorption of H2O and NaCl. Now as we know that the reabsorption is less, then the body will excrete more, in the case of increase in the urine volume or increase in the excretion of electrolytes. Now we are going to see about uses. So mannitol, it is used in decreased intracranial tension. It will draw fluid from the brain into circulation by the osmotic effect, and it will decrease the intracranial tension. Then second is in the case of glaucoma, it will decrease the intraocular pressure. It will also draw the fluid from the eye by the osmotic effect into blood, which will decrease the intraocular pressure. And third is it will prevent the cardiovascular surgeries, hemolytic transfusion reactions, acute renal shutdown in shock. Now we are going to see about uses. If there is too much quantity of IV mannitol, then it will lead to pulmonary edema. It means there will be increased ECF volume. Second is headache, nausea, vomiting, as well as there will be hyperglycemia, which will occur due to glycerol. So this was all about osmotic diuretic. We are going to see about loop diuretics. It will act on the ascending limb of loop of Fenley, and the examples are furosemide and torsemide. These are high ceiling diuretics. Now we are going to see about mechanism of action. So firstly, it will bind to sodium chloride potassium co-transporter, and it will block its function. Now as the function is blocked, it will increase the excretion of sodium chloride in urine, and due to this, the tubular fluid which will reach the DCT, it will contain large amount of sodium. Hence, more sodium exchanges with the potassium, which will lead to potassium loss. Now in loop diuretic, there will be increased excretion of calcium, magnesium and bicarbonate, as well as it get rapidly absorbed through GIT. Now furosemide, it can be administered through oral, IV or intramuscular, and it has rapid onset of action. Now if we administered in the case of IV, there will be rapid onset of action in just 2 to 5 minutes. Then through IM, that is intramuscular, it will be 10 to 20 minutes, and through oral, it will be 30 to 40 minutes. But the duration of action of this is very short, it is just 2 to 4 hours. Then second is torsemide, it is given orally or intramuscularly. Now we are going to see about uses. So it can be used in the case of initial stages of renal and cardiac edema, as well as it can be given in the cerebral edema. Moreover, we can use it in the hepatic edema also. And fourth is in the case of hypercalcemia, furosemide is administered. Now we are going to see about adverse effects. So first is electrolyte disturbance will be there. There will be hypercalcemia, it means increase in calcium, as well as there will be hyponatremia, it means decrease in sodium, hypomagnesemia, it means decrease in magnesium. Now additional to this, there will be metabolic disturbances such as hyperglycemia, hyperuricemia, hyperlipidemia. There will be increased concentration of glucose, uric acid and lipid. Then is ototoxicity. It will lead to deafness, vertigo, tinnitus, and it is dangerous to hair cells which are present in the inner cells. Then fourth is hypersensitivity. So skin rash, eosinophilia or photosensitivity can occur. So this was all about loop diuretic. Now we are going to see about thiazide. These are medium efficacy diuretic which work on DCT. Now mechanism of action, it will inhibit the sodium chloride's import. It means increase in sodium and chloride excretion, which will lead to increased exchange of sodium and potassium, which will result in potassium loss. Now we are going to see about uses. So first is hypertension, then second is in the case of edema, then third is in the case of chronic heart failure. So here thiazide, these are given in combination with the loop diuretics, and fourth is in the case of hypercalciuria, used in calcium nephrolithiasis. Now adverse effects. So electrolyte disturbance will be there, which will lead to hypokalemia and hypercalcemia. Yeah. Then second is metabolic disturbances. Here will be hyperglycemia, hyperlipidemia, hyperuricemia, as well as there will be hypersensitivity reactions such as skin rashes or photosensitivity. And moreover to this, there will be GI disturbances such as vomiting, nausea, diarrhea. So this was all about thiazide. Emetics and antiemetics. This is the most important topic of GIT, which includes electives as well as SAQs. Nausea and vomiting, these are the protective reflexes of our body to remove the toxic substances. So emetics, these induce the vomiting to remove indigested toxins, while antiemetics, this will treat the nausea and vomiting by blocking the neural pathways. So now we are going to see in this in detail. So these are the drugs which are used to prevent or control the vomiting. They are known as antiemetics. Antiemetics, they are classified as anticholinergics, neuroleptics, then H1 antihistamines, then 5-HT3 antagonist, then NK1 receptor antagonist, then prokinetic drugs and adjuvant antiemetics. So anticholinergics, these actually block the M receptor, that is muscarinic receptor, and examples are dicyclomine or hyoscine. The next is neuroleptics, so these actually block the D2 receptors, that is dopamine receptors, and the examples are chlorpromazine, then triflupromazine. The next is 5-HT3 antagonist, so this actually block the serotonin receptors in the GIT as well as CNS to prevent the nausea and vomiting, and examples are ondansetron and ramosetron. The next is H1 antihistamine, so this actually blocks the histamine receptors in the subthalamic nucleus to prevent the vomiting. It includes diphenhydramine and doxylamine. The next is prokinetic drugs. So this actually reduces the vomiting by enhancing GI motility and block the D2 receptors, that is dopamine receptors. It includes cisapride, mosapride, metoclopramide and domperidone. These two are very important. And last but not least, it is NK1 receptor antagonist, also help in prevention of vomiting. It includes aprepitant and fosaprepitant. And last is adjuvant antiemetics. So this works by blocking the specific neurotransmitter receptors which are present in a vomiting reflex. And it includes benzodiazepine and dexamethasone. Now we are going to see all these things in detail. So first is 5-HT3 receptor antagonist. So ondansetron, this is the most common drug which is used as a prototype drug. Their antiemetic effect, it is mainly due to the blockade of 5-HT3 receptors on the vagal afferents in the gut. So basically this is a gut and here are vagus nerves. Since there are some receptors such as 5-HT3 receptor, and this ondansetron, it will block this 5-HT3 receptors, as well as they block the 5-HT3 receptors in the CTZ, that is chemotrigger zone, and solitary tract nucleus. The mechanism of action of this is the anti-cancer drugs and radiotherapy. This actually induces the vomiting. First, it will damage the tissue in a gut. Serotonin, it will get released, that is 5-HT, from enterochromaffin cells of the intestinal mucosa. Then it will stimulate the vagal afferent in the gut through the 5-HT3 receptors. In this impulses, it will reach to chemotrigger zone and subthalamic nucleus, which will induce the vomiting. If we block these 5-HT3 receptors, then there will be no vomiting. So this is the mechanism of action of 5-HT3 antagonist. Now we are going to say about pharmacokinetics. So it can be well absorbed after the oral administration, and the metabolites, these are excreted in the urine and feces. As well as these agents, this can also given as IV administration. Moreover, transdermal patch of granisetron, it is also available for preventing the cancer chemotherapy induced vomiting. So this was all about pharmacokinetic. Now we are going to say about uses. So these are most effective agent for prevention and treatment of chemotherapy induced nausea and vomiting. As well as they are also effective in hyperemesis of pregnancy, post-operative and prostradation and drug-induced vomiting, but they are ineffective against motion sickness. So this was all about uses. Now we are going to see about adverse effects. They causes headache, dizziness and diarrhea. So this was all about 5-HT3 antagonist. We see about prokinetic drugs. So these are the drugs which promote the coordinated movement of GIT and hasten the gastric emptying. These are known as prokinetic drugs. The most important prokinetic drugs are metoclopramide and domperidone. To see all these things in detail, first is metoclopramide. This actually blocks the D2 receptors in the chemotrigger zone. High concentration, it also blocks the 5-HT3 receptors which are present in chemotrigger zone. Here are three things which are blocked by the metoclopramide. First it is 5-HT4 agonism, then D2 antagonism and 5-HT3 antagonism in the gut. This will actually accelerate the gastric emptying by enhancing the acetylcholine secretion. Now there are some effects of metoclopramide on the upper GIT, that it will increase the tone of lower esophageal sphincter, as well as it relaxes the pyloric sphincter, the peristalsis of small intestine. Now as you can see in this figure that it will increase the tone of lower esophageal sphincter, it will relaxes the pyloric sphincter and duodenal bulb, and third is it will increase the peristaltic movement of upper GIT. Now the most important point is the metoclopramide, it cannot be used to treat the levodopa induced vomiting. And is it will cross the blood-brain barrier and it blocks the D2 receptor in the basal ganglia, thus interfering with the anti-Parkinsonian effect of levodopa. So it cannot be used to treat the levodopa induced vomiting. Next topic is uses. So as the antiemetics, metoclopramide is effective for prevention and treatment of disease-associated vomiting, drug-induced vomiting except levodopa, and third is post-operative vomiting. GERD, that is gastroesophageal reflux disease, this is also treated by metoclopramide. So metoclopramide, it produces the symptomatic relief in the patients with the reflux esophagitis by increasing the tone of lower esophageal sphincter, as well as it stimulates the gastric emptying before the general anesthesia in the emergency surgeries. It can be also used in treatment of hiccups. So these are some uses. Now we are going to say about adverse effects. Drowsiness, dizziness and diarrhea. These are some common adverse effects of metoclopramide. As well as there will be acute dystonia, that is spasm of muscles of face, tongue, neck and back. There can be extrapyramidal symptoms such as tremor, rigidity. This can be due to blockage of dopamine receptors. So this was all about metoclopramide. Now we are going to say about domperidone. It is less potent and less efficacious than the metoclopramide, but it poorly crosses blood-brain barrier, and due to this the extrapyramidal effects will be rare. We are going to say about pharmacokinetics. Administered orally, and its bioavailability is very low because of extensive first-pass metabolism, and it is metabolized in liver and metabolites are excreted in the urine. Domperidone, it can be also preferred antiemetics in the children as it rarely produces EPS. And additional to this, it can be also given in the case of levodopa as it counteracts vomiting induced by the levodopa without affecting their pancreasonium effect as it poorly crosses blood-brain barrier. So it is preferred over metoclopramide, vomiting induced by this drug. And side effect of these are dryness of mouth, diarrhea, headache, skin rashes, galactorrhea, and menstrual irregularity. You can see in this figure that the metoclopramide and domperidone, this both has prokinetic effect. This both will block the CTZ, 5-HT3 and dopamine receptors. As well as the most important point that it poorly crosses the blood-brain barrier, but metoclopramide, it crosses the blood-brain barrier and it blocks the dopamine receptors in the basal ganglia, hence there will be extrapyramidal symptoms. So this was all about domperidone. Ulcer drugs. So peptic ulcers, these are the open sores on the lining of the stomach or on the duodenum. And these are caused by acid damage, often from H. pylori bacteria. Firstly, we are going to see about classification of peptic ulcer drugs. So it includes gastric acid secretion inhibitors, then gastric acid neutralizers, then ulcer protectives, last is anti-H. pylori drugs. So gastric acid secretion inhibitors, it includes H2 antihistamines, which includes cimetidine, ranitidine. Then proton pump inhibitors, it includes omeprazole and esomeprazole. It also includes lansoprazole or pantoprazole. Then prostaglandin analog, it includes misoprostol. And anticholinergics, it includes pirenzepine or oxyphenonium. The next is gastric acid neutralizers. So it includes two things, systemic and non-systemic. Now systemic, it includes sodium bicarbonate and sodium citrate. And non-systemic, it includes hydroxides such as magnesium or aluminium. The third is ulcer protectives. So it includes sucralfate or colloidal bismuth subcitrate, that is CBS. And last is anti-H. pylori drugs. So it includes CBS and amoxicillin. So anti-acid, this actually neutralizes the acid which is present in the stomach. There is on the other side PPIs, that is proton pump inhibitors, H2 blockers, prostaglandin. This actually decreases the secretion of acid. And last are the drugs which protect the ulcers, that is sucralfate or CBS. Now we are going to see all these things in detail. So first, drugs that inhibit the gastric acid secretion. So it includes proton pump inhibitors. So this proton pump, these are the membrane bound enzyme which plays an important role in the final step of gastric acid secretion. And this proton pump inhibitor, it actually blocks the proton pump which is present in the stomach. So omeprazole, this is a prototype drug, and the other PPIs which are used here are lansoprazole, pantoprazole or rabeprazole. This PPIs, it acts as a prodrug and it is absorbed in the small intestine, then it enters blood, and from blood it enters the parietal cell. So they diffuse in the parietal cell, then they reach the canaliculi of cell where there is acidic pH, and as they are converted into their active form or charged form in the presence of acidic pH into sulfonamide. Now this activated form, that is sulfonamide, it will bind covalently with the SH group of proton pump and it will irreversibly inactivate the proton pump. Now these proton pump inhibitors, these are the most powerful inhibitors of the gastric acid secretion. So now PPIs, these are administered orally about 30 minutes before the food because food stimulates the secretion of acid which is necessary for the activation of PPIs into sulfonamide. Now this is a diagrammatic representation of this. So basically these PPIs get diffused into the parietal cell, and after getting diffusion, it goes into the canaliculi where there is acidic pH, and then in the presence of acidic pH, these PPIs get converted into sulfonamide, that is the active form of this, and then it inhibits the proton pump. So this is the mechanism of action of proton pump inhibitors. Now we are going to see about therapeutic uses. So first and most important is peptic ulcer. So PPIs, these are most powerful acid suppressive agents and they inhibit all phases of gastric acid secretion. Now these proton pump inhibitors, these are superior to the H2 blockers as their onset of action is rapid and it causes the ulcer healing. Standard doses are omeprazole is 20 mg, lansoprazole is 30 mg and pantoprazole is 40 mg once daily. The next is it can be also used preoperatively to reduce the risk of aspiration pneumonia. Then third is Zollinger-Ellison syndrome, that is ZD syndrome. So this is characterized by hypergastronemia with the multiple peptic ulcers, and here PPIs are the preferred agent for the ZD syndrome. Well, as the higher doses of PPIs, they are needed for healing of ulcers, so surgery is the definitive treatment in the case of ZD syndrome. And fourth is GERD, that is gastroesophageal reflux disease. So in this also the goal of therapy is to reduce the symptom relief, heal erosive esophagitis as well as prevent complications. So PPIs, these are preferred agents for the treatment of GERD and they are usually given once daily. As well as H2 blockers are also given in all these things. So this was all about proton pump inhibitor. Now to see about H2 receptor antagonists, that is H2 blockers. So it includes ranitidine, cimetidine, nizatidine. Now we are going to see mechanism of action of this. So H2 receptor antagonists, it will competitively block the H2 receptor which are present on the parietal cell, will inhibit the gastric acid production, as well as they suppresses all phases of gastric acid secretion, that is basal, cephalic as well as gastric. Now there are two major drugs which are used in this. So first is cimetidine and ranitidine. So cimetidine and ranitidine, these both are H2 blockers and they will competitively block this. Now cimetidine, this is a less potent drug, but ranitidine is more potent, as well as ranitidine has longer duration of action, that is 24 hours, but on the other side cimetidine has shorter duration of action, that is just 6 to 8 hours. Now in the case of cimetidine, there will be the increased plasma prolactin level, but in the case of ranitidine, it will not increase the prolactin secretion. So due to prolactin secretion increase, there will be menstrual irregularity or galactorrhea in women or gynecomastia impotence in men. But in ranitidine, there is no antiandrogenic effect. It will cross the blood-brain barrier and produces the CNS effects such as confusion, headache and hallucinations. But on the other side, ranitidine, it poorly crosses blood-brain barrier and here side effects are very rare. Now we are going to see about therapeutic side effects. So first is peptic ulcer. So H2 blockers are one of the commonly used drugs for the peptic ulcer. But proton pump inhibitors are superior to H2 blockers. The proton pump inhibitors are more used in the case of peptic ulcer treatment. Now H2 blockers, they produce a symptomatic relief within days and ulcer healing within weeks. For example, duration of treatment for duodenal ulcer is 4 to 6 weeks. As well as H. pylori associated ulcers. So here H2 blockers, they are used along with the antimicrobial agent and it will treat the H. pylori infection. Now next is GERD. So H2 blockers are effective and produce a symptomatic relief, but PPIs, these are more effective than the H2 blockers. Third is ZD syndrome. So in this, surgery is the definitive therapy, but here PPIs or H2 blockers, these are used to control the hypersecretion of acid, and these are the preferred agents in the case of ZD syndrome. And last is H2 blockers. So they are used preoperatively to reduce the risk of aspiration pneumonia. So this was all about H2 blockers. To say about ulcer protective sucralfate. So it is a complex made up of aluminum hydroxide and sulfated sucrose. Acidic environment of stomach, the sucral fat, it will undergo polymerization to form a sticky polymers which will adhere to ulcer base and protect it. Basically, if this is a ulcer and this is a base, so here there will be a sticky polymerization of sucral plate which will protect the ulcer. As well as it also precipitates proteins at the ulcer base which forms a barrier against the acid pepsin. Moreover to this, it stimulates the release of prostaglandins and epidermal growth factors locally, thus produces a cytoprotective effect. And sucralfate, it is given orally in an empty stomach at least 1 hour before the meals. And the side effect of sucralfate is that the nausea can occur. This drug that neutralizes the gastric acid, that is known as antacids. So these are basically of two types, non-systemic and systemic. So first we are going to say about systemic. So systemic, it includes two things, sodium bicarbonate and sodium citrate. Sodium bicarbonate, it rapidly neutralizes the gastric acid, but duration of action is very short. And the disadvantage of these are it is highly water soluble, it rapidly absorbs from the gut, as well as it releases CO2 which can cause the abdominal distension, which can lead to metabolic alkalosis and produce the rebound acidity. Now this sodium bicarbonate, it can be used to alkaline urine and to treat acidosis. It should be contraindicated in the patients with a hypertension or congestive cardiac failure as it causes the sodium retention. It was about systemic, now we are going to say about non-systemic. So non-systemic, it includes sodium hydroxide, magnesium trisilicate, aluminum hydroxide, calcium carbonate. Now when this reaches intestine, the chloride salt, it will react with the bicarbonate and the bicarbonate is not available for the absorption, so there will be no systematic alkalosis. Now if we give in a combination, then it will produce various beneficial effects such as aluminum salt, it causes constipation, and magnesium salt, it causes diarrhea. So basically if we give in a combination of these two, then it can counteract the adverse effect of each other. The second example is of magnesium hydroxide, it has rapid onset of action, whereas aluminum hydroxide, it acts slowly. So it produces a combined effect and it produces a rapid and sustained effect. As well as due to combination, the dose of the individual antacid is reduced and hence the systemic toxicity is minimized. So this was all about antacids. Now we are going to say about anti-H. pylori agents. So H. pylori, this is a gram-negative rod-shaped bacteria which is associated with the gastritis, duodenal ulcers, gastritic ulcers or gastric carcinoma. The mechanism of action of this is the ammonia it will produced by the urease activity, it may damage the cells. Antimicrobial used in the H. pylori infections are amoxicillin, tetracycline, clarithromycin, then metronidazole and tinidazole. Additional to this, it can develop the resistance rapidly to the metronidazole and clarithromycin, but not to the amoxicillin. So amoxicillin should not be avoided in the patients with a history of penicillin allergy. And other anti-H. pylori drugs are PPIs, that is proton pump inhibitors, H2 blockers and CBS. Now there are two regimens which are given in H. pylori infection, that is triple therapy and quadruple therapy. So triple therapy, it is given 14 days as well as quadruple therapy is also given 14 days, that is 2 weeks. Triple therapy, there will be lansoprazole, clarithromycin and amoxicillin. And in quadruple therapy, there will be omeprazole, CBS, tetracycline and metronidazole. So this was all about drugs of peptic ulcers. Basically, laxatives are the medication which are used to treat the constipation by promoting the bowel movement. So these are the drugs which facilitate the evacuation of formed stools from the bowel. Now there are some laxatives. First is stool softeners. There are two things. First is DocuSates and second is liquid paraffin. So first we are going to see about DocuSates. Its common DocuSate salts are DOSS and second is DOCS. Dioctyl sodium sulfosuccinate and second is dioctyl calcium sulfosuccinate. So DocuSates, these actually lower the surface tension of stool and it causes the accumulation of fluid as well as fatty substance and thus softening the stool. Now these agents, it will act within 1 to 3 days and they are administered orally or as a retention enema. Now retention enema means administration through rectum in a liquid form. So this was about DocuSate. Now we are going to say about liquid paraffin. So liquid paraffin, it is a mineral oil and it is administered orally. It softens the stool as well as it also has a lubricant effect which helps in the smooth defecation. Moreover, it is useful in patients with the cardiac diseases because it prevents the straining during the defecation. Now there are some adverse effects. So first is liquid pneumonia. So it may occur due to the entry of drug into the lungs. Hence liquid paraffin should not be given at the bedtime or in a lying down position. Now long term use, it may cause the malabsorption of vitamins such as A, D, E, K. It means fat soluble vitamins. And third is it can cause the leakage of fecal matter through the anal sphincter. It may lead to spoiling of clothes. Now second one is osmotic laxatives. So they are the salts of magnesium, sodium or potassium. Those having the magnesium or phosphates, they are known as saline laxatives. Now we are going to see about pharmacokinetics and mechanism of osmotic laxatives. So osmotic purgatives, these are given orally, early morning or in an empty stomach with plenty of water. Now mechanism of action, so it acts on the small and large intestine within 1 to 3 hours. And as we know, it is not absorbed in gut, so it directly goes into small and large intestine. So it will draw the fluid into the lumen by the osmotic activity. And as the fluid is inside the lumen, then it will distend the bowel, which will stimulate the peristalsis and which helps in evacuation of watery stools in 1 to 3 hours. So this was all about osmotic laxatives. Now we are going to say about lactulose. So it is a disaccharide of fructose and galactose. This is available in two forms, liquid and powder. As well as on oral administration, it is not absorbed through GIT mucosa. Here the mechanism of action of lactulose is the colonic bacteria, this will convert it into the acidic product, then which will exert the osmotic effect, and same as like osmotic laxatives, it will draw the fluid into lumen and distend it, thus useful in constipation. It produces soft to loose stools and it can be used to treat the constipation in children as well as in pregnant women. Now lactulose, it is also used in hepatic coma to reduce the blood ammonia level. And the side effect of these are abdominal discomfort and flatulence. So this was all about laxatives. Now the next topic is antidiarrheal drugs. So diarrhea, it is defined as loose or watery stools with at least 3 times or more in a 24-hour period. To control diarrhea, we gave antidiarrheal drugs. So they are divided into 4 types, that is antimicrobial drugs, probiotics, drugs for IBD and non-specific antidiarrheal drugs. Antimicrobial drugs, it comprises of norfloxacin, ciprofloxacin, ampicillin, tetracycline and metronidazole. Then probiotics, it contains lactobacillus species, Streptococcus faecalis and Enterococcus species. In drugs for IBD, it has three things: 5-ASA compound, glucocorticoids and immunosuppressants. Now 5-ASA compound, it contains sulfasalazine, mesalazine and olsalazine. Glucocorticoid, it contains prednisolone and hydrocortisone. And in immunosuppressant, we gave methotrexate or cyclosporine. Then last is non-specific antidiarrheal drug. It is also divided into three things: absorbent or adsorbent, anti-secretory drug and antimotility drug. In this, we gave methylcellulose or pectin. Then anti-secretory drug, it contains bismuth subsalicyclate or anticholinergics. Also gave octreotide. And last is antimotility drug. So here we prefer codeine or loperamide. Let's see these things in detail. So before saying this, we are first going to see about ORS, that is oral rehydration solution. So in acute diarrhea, it is important to maintain the water as well as electrolyte with a proper fluid replacement. So in this, we prefer ORS. Now according to WHO, this ORS contains four things: NaCl, KCl, sodium citrate and glucose. Now what are concentration of this? So sodium chloride, it is given is 2.6 gram, then KCl 1.5 gram, sodium citrate 2.9 gram and glucose 13.5 gram. They should be dissolved in 1 liter of water. Now the sodium and potassium, these are administered to replace the losses, and sodium, it is transported along with the glucose by the sodium glucose co-transporter in the ileum. To this citrate, it acts as a base, so it corrects the acidosis. What are functions of ORS? So ORS, it decreases the stool volume as well as vomiting, and it is also effective in cholera. Additional to this, it is also useful in heat stroke or maintenance of hydration in a burn patients. And or in case of a severe diarrhea with a dehydration, in this IV fluids are indicated. An important note that WHO, it recommends the use of zinc supplements additional to ORS in acute diarrhea in children. Now why this is recommended? Because it decreases the intestinal secretion as well as promote the regeneration of the intestinal epithelium and reduces the duration and severity of diarrhea. So this was all about ORS. Now we are going to see about octreotide and codeine. So octreotide, this is the analog of somatostatin and it is useful in secretory diarrhea. Whereas on the other side, this codeine, this is a natural opium alkaloid. Now what are functions of this? So octreotide, it inhibits the secretion of 5-HT, vasoactive intestinal peptide, gastrin and insulin. Whereas on the other side, this codeine, it actually decreases the GI motility and produces the constipation. Additional to these two drugs, we also give risocadotril. Basically, this is a prodrug and it is a N-caffeilinase inhibitor. It also inhibits the degradation of N-caffeilins in the intestinal mucosa. Due to the inhibition of degradation of N-caffeilins, it increases the concentration of N-caffeilins in the intestinal mucosa, and due to this, it will lead to decrease in intestinal secretions. So this was all about mechanism of action of risocadotril. Now we are going to see about its uses. So it is used in acute secretory diarrhea. It can be also used in children and the side effects are very less. So nausea, vomiting or drowsiness will only occur. This was all about risocadotril. Now we are going to see about loperamide. So loperamide, this is an opiate analog and it has more potent antidiarrheal effect than morphine. Now what is the action of loperamide? So basically it reduces the GI motility and increases the oral sphincter tone. Due to this, it also decreases the secretion, which helps in controlling the diarrhea. So it is orally effective and has a rapid onset of action, as well as it poorly penetrates the blood-brain barrier and has no abusive potential. Now what is dosage of this? So loperamide, it is given 4 mg stat and then 2 mg after each loose stool. But the maximum dose, it should not exceed 16 mg in a 24 hours. And this can be used in both acute as well as chronic diarrhea. It can be also used in traveler's diarrhea. Side effects of this are skin rashes, headache and paralytic ileus. And due to this toxic effect, it should not be used in a children younger than 4 years. So this was all about antidiarrheal effect.